Good evening. Welcome to Prime Time with Faisal Rashid. Here we discuss business, finance, and lots of international markets, businesses happening all around the world. Today I have very special guests in my studio. I have Mr. Steve Park, CEO of Warrington Borough Council, and Stephen Fitzsimons, CEO of Warrington Chamber. We will discuss role of local authorities in economic growth in different towns and cities. However, in particular, we will discuss what they've been doing and how that's been impacted in Warrington. Let me welcome Steve Park and Stephen Fitzsimons. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Really pleased to have you in my show today, and thank you very much for taking the time in the evening out of your busy schedule as well. Steve, I'm going to start with you first. We have worked a long time in the council together as well, and I've seen, the transformation under your leadership within the council as well. So we will touch base on that as well. However, I would like you to give us a little bit of overview the role of the local authorities in economic growth and how important it is.
Organisation through which businesses could access finance. It was through local authorities that business could get to central governments often. Councils have got land and they've got planning powers, and these all matter when it comes to investment decisions that the businesses are looking to take either tactically or strategically. So I think the local authorities have always been a bit of a broker when it comes to economic growth. They're not often businesses themselves, obviously, but they understand the way in which the local economy works. They certainly understand the skills sector, and businesses, as you'll know, are often very keen on understanding what the skills supply is in any given sector. So again, the council can act as a bit of a broker working with local skills providers. So that's generally the role that they've played.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we see a lot of times people really talk about the council is not doing this, and we really get a lot of slack as well about a number of things like roads and infrastructure and lots of things not happening. But there are a number of things happening as well. So before I started into the council in 2011, my kind of idea was the same. And when I actually experienced myself working with you guys and lots of other offices, I got to know actually what is inside, how difficult it is. And then you realize, there is a lot of things happening also, which is not being publicized. So how local authorities, if they are actually making some economic growth, how do you engage with the public to give that impression? And that's really very important.
Yeah, I think I think it's important that there is a very strong engagement with communities. And with the business community, more to the point. So, as you say, so that they understand exactly where councils are coming from, what the priorities are, and sometimes business investment can take many, many years. It's not a case of we make a statement one day and all of a sudden a business and a brand new office or a brand new manufacturing facility is available. It can take many, many years. I think what's important is that the business community understand that the council's on their side. What a council is primarily there to do is to make that investment experience, that investment journey, as smooth and as easy as possible. Sure. Because investors have choice, don't they? Investors can go to various locations. But if they feel that they're working with a business-friendly local authority that understands how business works and to an extent kind of speaks their language, then I think you'll find businesses will kind of, there'll be that reputation built over time, and that's certainly what we've done in Warrington. We've become very famous really for being a very business friendly town, because we do make that investor experience as smooth as it possibly can be.
Yeah, absolutely right, and that leads me to come to Stephen, to you, especially in Warrington Chamber of Commerce. Now, Warrington is rebranded, isn't it? Warrington Chamber Plus. So what Steve just said, so how you make that difference working with the council as a chamber and the council?
To be specific as well, one of the events that we're really proud of is the Warrington Property review, which is now in its 27th year. So we attract nearly 200 delegates to this. And again, that was set up so many years, and the fact that Warrington manages to sustain so many property deals throughout the year and bring the community together, that's something that we're really, really proud of. So without that organisation, it would just be another ordinary local authority.
Absolutely. I'm obviously, I've seen that through over a decade as well. So absolutely correct. But if you think about that, if you look at the Warrington's overall regeneration, kind of a history and the whole regeneration over the last decade, I think that started since 2011 when the Labour took over in 2011, and after that it was really boomed. Lots of regeneration programs and plannings and starting in the town centre. It's massive difference if you look at after 10 years before and now. It's massive difference. How do you actually make that happen? And also, if you look at surrounding, Warrington is a small town, but there are like Widnes, St Helens, Newton Leavilla. There are lots of little towns surrounding Warrington. How do you compare yourself with those towns, and what is better things you are doing in Warrington?
Concerned in saying that I think we've set the blueprint actually for town centre regeneration, particularly in the north of England, and that's evidenced by towns coming visiting us and understanding how we've done it, and asking actually the question that you just asked me. How did you go about it? I think the first thing we did was we were very clear about what our vision was for the town centre. It wasn't just about regeneration. Actually, what do you want to achieve? We want vibrancy, we want footfall, people, but we start to make statements to the investor community that, look, the council's got a very clear eye on exactly what it wants its town centre to be. First and foremost, we're not going to be a city. We're not going to try and be a city. We did. The politicians at the time were very keen on having that kind of profile. I don't think there was ever a real chance that we were going to get city status. And frankly, it wasn't about actually becoming a city. What it was about was showing the confidence that as a town, you believe you can be a city. And sometimes that, it's not arrogance, it's confidence. And that confidence can really spread amongst the business community, where they feel that there's a local authority that's got ambition, not just for the town centre, but for the entire borough, rather than being a local authority that's kind of complaining about lack of money. We're actually doing something about it, and having that kind of confidence to say, yeah, we could be a city if we wanted to be. But the vision for the town centre was really quite important. The next step after the vision was to use that old phrase, "Put your money where your mouth is." So there's a lot of fancy words being said about what we want from our town centre, but unless the council was prepared to invest, and in doing so take some risk, then frankly the private sector was never going to follow. So the council did exactly that. It invested in the heart of its town centre in a development called Times Square. This was well before COVID. This was a journey started really back in 2016. It's been a tremendous success. It's now held up as the model for town centre regeneration. But what it's done is it's attracted a vast amount of private sector investment now. So the council has done its job. It put its money where its mouth was. It delivered with some success. It's difficult. The food and beverage and leisure sector is very volatile, has been since COVID times, continues to be today, cost of living crisis and so on. So it's never an easy thing to deliver. It's certainly not an easy thing to run, and it's still council owned and council run, but it has been successful in attracting that the private sector investments. And that's really, the kind of I would say an indicator of the character of Warrington, that the public and the private sector work hand in hand. And we're very clear on what we can and can't do and what we should and shouldn't do. But equally, we don't try and be the private sector. We invest where we need to, but otherwise we leave it to the private sector. And from time to time, we'll work in joint venture where we think that's most appropriate.
When we do look at some of our neighbours who aren't doing as well as we are, and it sounds like I'm picking on places, but Crewe has had its challenges, lost out on HS2. St Helens, of course, just over the border, they lost their Chamber of Commerce last year. So we feel very fortunate, but it comes down to having a strong economy. So Warrington's got one of the highest levels of employment in the whole of the north of England. Same for the gross value added, the GVA. So the value of our economy is strong. Yes, we've still got those deprived areas, as you'll recall from being an MP for the South, but the whole of the economy is comparable to anywhere in the southeast of England.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you on that point as well. But I think it's very difficult we're having really good conversation today, and for the local authority, having a confidence with the business community locally is very important and very vital for any town or city's economic growth. We'll be right back, take a short break. Thank you. Welcome back. We were talking about business confidence with the local authorities and how to build it. Let's continue our talk with Steve Park and Stephen Fitzsimons. Steve, before we went to break, we were talking about how you actually built that confidence. I want to talk a little bit more about that, because that's really, really important, because businesses normally don't have much confidence with the local authorities. And this is why they are quite reluctant to invest in that, obviously, with the local businesses, and they actually move out. For example, Manchester, Liverpool, Warrington is a small town in between, but with a very excellent geographical place with transportation links. And how did you manage to actually build that confidence with the businesses, where I can see there is huge amount of investment in Warrington in logistic business? Was it planned? Or, for example, Omega site, was it always planned for logistics, or was it emerged depending on the need of the market?
Well, I think investment will always follow need, won't it?
Yeah.
And I think when the first master plan for Omega was developed first, back in 2011, 2012, the office market was really quite strong.
Yeah.
And we already had a very strong, and still do have a very strong office market in Warrington, really centred around Birchwood Park and Birchwood more generally. But there was an emerging need for more office space. Of course, this was well before COVID.
Yeah.
And because of its position, right on the motorway junction of the M62, Omega lended itself to a perfect office development place. Now, it wouldn't all be office, because there's 2.5 million square feet of available development land there, so there was never going to be all office. So there was always going to be a bit of a mix of housing, office, yes, logistics, but also a bit of manufacturing. So as the economy kind of changed, as we came out of COVID, and we could see that the office demand was beginning to drop, that was replaced by logistics. But the manufacturing demand was still there. And in fact, Omega is seen as a logistics place, but actually there's a good number of international manufacturing businesses based on Omega. And of course, we've delivered the housing as well. But what was key was, always the case, you have a plan. You have a vision for that place that you can sit down and have investment conversations with businesses on. And the other thing was, what we did was, going back to the point that Stephen made before the break, we had this thing called Warrington & Co., which was the public-private, and still is a public-private partnership. Businesses talk to businesses. Yes, of course, they speak to the local council, but businesses speak to businesses. And, Warrington & Co. was our private sector and is our private sector partnership. So businesses speak to the people who are part of Warrington & Co., and they get their story from them. They get their history of investing in Warrington, what their investor experience was like. And it's off of that the business confidence starts to grow. But it matters when it comes to the deal. It matters that the council is seen as being a can-do council, that if there is a barrier to growth, a barrier to speed within the law, then the council will bust those problems for you and make that investment experience all the better as a result. That's how we've done it in Warrington. It's easy to develop when acres and acres of land are available on a motorway, as we've got with Omega. Some of the harder developments is in the heart of the town centre, where you're actually regenerating from old buildings with contaminated land and that kind of thing. We might come on to that in a while. But that was the Omega story.
Excellent. I mean, you talk about the vision. There are lots of other councils as well. There is not very good stories with them. For example, St. Helens Chambers closed last year. There are lots of different local authorities struggle. So would you agree with me that it depends on the leadership, political leadership's will, or is it comes from the officers to the leadership, or is it top to bottom or bottom to top? So
Well, I think
how does it work?
I think you'll find in any well-run council that it's a partnership
Yeah,
between senior officer leaders and senior politicians.
yeah,
That relationship is absolutely key, and if that's functional and productive and respectful, then the joint vision that's established for the entire borough across all aspects of local authority responsibility, not just economic, but social services, education, and environment. Then you will find, by and large, that there is a good place that's delivered as a result. We've had a really strong track record in Warrington of having a very strong partnership between senior officers and local politicians, and that has undoubtedly helped deliver the legacy that is this economic powerhouse in the northwest.
I mean, I'm not going to bring my personal, political experience into it, because I just want to hear and give a factual information to the viewers and people who are listening. I mean, I work with you, so I mean, you're very business oriented. You want to make things happen, for the town, which is great. What happens if you want to do something, for example, a regeneration project, and if you think about the previous leadership, where we didn't see any growth in Warrington before 2011, and if you look at before 2011 for the past 8-9 years. I mean, how frustrated you can get, and what can you do to make that happen?
It's not always a function of the leadership. What you'll often find is, and you're seeing this with a lot of local authorities now that are looking at regenerating principally their town centres, it comes down to economic cycles. If you think about where we were before the Labour administration took power in Warrington, we just come off the back of the financial crash in 2009. That was a decade to fix. That's why we know that the country went through, and to an extent is still going through, austerity. But inside, just after the crash, that's the point at which you start to make your visionary statements. That's the point at which you plan. You plan in recession, and you deliver when the economic times are better. And that's exactly what you've seen in Warrington. So it's sometimes less about political leadership or even council officers. It's more about having that sense of timing, so that when the economic times are difficult, that's when you're building your partnerships. That's when you're doing your thinking. That's when you're doing your visioning. So when the economic times do return, and that is largely access to money that makes developments viable, well, you've already got the partnerships, you've already got the land, you've already got the planning powers, you've already got all the ingredients needed for investments not to start to be thought about, but actually starts delivering. And I think that's what we're particularly good at in Warrington, is about riding the economic cycles. And I think, were we fortunate, or was it good planning that we delivered Times Square when we did? Because, actually, to be fair to St Helens, they're going through a very similar process now, but of course they're going through that post-COVID when, the world changed radically, and in the way in which people use their town centre and the way in which they occupy space. That'll never be forgotten. So I think we're good at riding economic cycles, I think.
Definitely. I mean, this is why I wanted to bring you here as well, because St Helens actually did try their best. I mean, they wanted to be very proactive, and they did try. However, it is working or it is not working, we don't know. But chamber closed. I mean, that's one of the sign. But in terms of in any city and town, how would you make sure that the jobs creation is diverse? So it's not, for example, logistics. So if there is a demand, you mentioned there is a demand for logistics, and demand change. Of course, I understand that. But if you keep building logistics, then the quality of jobs or the diversification of the jobs won't happen. And the children who are, born and bred in Warrington and gone to college and uni, and they want to live in Warrington, and they want to have those jobs. So how do you work out a balance to create the jobs?
Well, I think there's two things in that. I think, first of all, it's a bit of a myth to think that logistics jobs are simply warehouse pickers in high-vis jackets. Right now, that might be, the entry level perhaps, but every warehouse has HR managers, HR department. Every warehouse has a finance department. Every warehouse has a property and a maintenance department. Every warehouse has an IT department, right? So there are a multitude of jobs on offer, and I could go on. The electricians and so there's a multitude of trade jobs.
But they're
office
quite
jobs.
Automated systems, aren't they?
They have automated systems, and someone's got to build and look after the automated systems, by the way, and that in itself is a high value job as well. So when you do build large scale logistics, it's not always the case. In fact, it isn't the case that those warehouses are just filled with warehouse pickers on minimum wage. That's not the case at all. And in fact, you go and speak to any of the businesses on Omega, and they'll tell you exactly that same story. Go visit and you'll see it with your own eyes. The other point I was going to make was, you asked the question about how you keep the jobs, the diversity of the jobs alive. It's really important. This is where the Chamber of Commerce comes into play, where businesses and the skills providers, the local further education colleges or higher education colleges like the university, that there is a strong relationship between the business community and the education sector, because it's those investors in the business community that are working with the skills providers to ensure that the skills that they're going to need in 5 years' time are being developed now. So as we're sat here, there'll be investors talking to skills providers about jobs that are only going to be delivered in 5 years' time. And the growth in jobs, and you'll hear this more often in different podcasts and in different newspaper articles, the jobs that children born today are going to be doing don't exist today. They don't exist, and
very fast paced. It's
very
changing every day,
and it's exponential. So AI, which there's hardly a podcast goes by these days, or TV program or a news article that doesn't mention AI, but it's real. And it is having a profound effect on the way business is delivered. So if we don't skill our future generation on AI, then and we are doing that in Warrington, then any local economy is going to start to fall behind.
Welcome back. Let's continue our talk with Steve and Stephen. Before we went to break, Stephen, you were talking about the support available through Warrington Chamber, and number of things you have actually taken into account and helped local businesses. I want to move forward, Steve, if I may, to talk about devolution. What's happening with that in Warrington? It's been going on for a long time. Is it happening? Who you are partnering with? And if you can give us just an overview, really.
Yeah, well, it's a really exciting time because devolution is going ahead in Cheshire and Warrington, which is the sub-region, as it's called. It has been, since the Labour government came back into power, they've been very clear that they want what they call universal coverage of devolution. In other words, all areas of England will have devolution in one way, shape or form within this Parliament. That's really mattered to us because it's given us the impetus to get together with the other two local authorities and work proactively and effectively to put a proposition to government to say, look, in Cheshire and Warrington we've worked really well over many, many years through what was the local enterprise partnership, and we've shown to be competent in developing the local economy between three local councils, and so now that we have an opportunity to grasp a new devolution arrangement. So there used to be a deal, but now all local authority areas are being given the opportunity to take a specific devolution agreement that's pretty standard up and down the country. And we were given the opportunity earlier this year to join what's called the Devolution Priority Programme. And that really is a collection of 6 local authority areas that will look to get devolution delivered in May of 2026.
Oh, is
now,
that close?
It's that close. Now, of the 6 areas going forward, of those 6 areas, 2 of them won't have a mayor for the first 12 months. Cheshire and Warrington is one of them. The other is Cumbria. The other 4 areas will be going forward with a mayor in their first year. So we had our notification from government that Cheshire and Warrington will be receiving £21.4 million a year, every year, for the next 30 years. Now, that's guaranteed funding coming into Cheshire and Warrington that we've not had before, and it's fundamentally about taking decision making out of Whitehall, placing it in the hands of local leaders with a locally elected mayor, and investing that money in a way that the local authority leaders know will work best for Cheshire and Warrington. Okay. So it's something that's it's been going in Manchester. Manchester was the forerunner with devolution, and frankly, you've only got to look at Greater Manchester to see the benefits that devolution can bring across a whole swathe of sectors. A little bit tracking behind them was Liverpool and Liverpool City region, but they've still been going strong and continuing to do great things with their devolution funding and local governance that they have surrounding that. Yeah. So, with Cheshire and Warrington, it's been a long time coming. Really exciting time, and you'll be hearing more of this as we get into the next.
I remember there was a time when I think you were trying to associate with either Liverpool or Manchester. So that's no question of that anymore now.
No, I think that's when the politicians were kind of working out what's best for Cheshire and Warrington, what's best for Warrington, and there was various options potentially available to all three local authority areas actually, but the governments have been very clear. They want devolution in Cheshire and Warrington. They want Cheshire and Warrington to continue as three local authority areas. The local authority leaders are in complete agreement and have demonstrated that competency over the years. And I go back to the point I made earlier actually, that when Warrington Borough Council put its money where its mouth was, that was the phrase I used earlier. And that really was the catalyst for the regeneration of the town centre in particular. Well, of course, Warrington, like practically every other local authority, doesn't have that money anymore to put where its mouth was. So where does the money come from? So if the public sector is to continue to have that intervention capability with public sector funding in order to ignite private sector investment, well, frankly, you'll hear this phrase very often, the devolution is the only game in town. So it's really exciting for Cheshire and Warrington to be where it's at now, fully committed. We're just waiting for the English devolution bill to clear the House. That will become an act towards the end of the end of this year, beginning of next year, and then we'll be into having our first combined authority from May of 2027 onwards.
You mentioned about there are 6 areas. So can you tell which 6 areas are included in this?
I can't pass that again, but all I can tell you is our closest neighbour is Cumbria. There are various up and down the country. These are only the ones in the devolution priority programme. So there's 6 other areas dotted around England.
Okay, so we are only Warrington and Cheshire.
Cheshire and Warrington is one devolution area. Cumbria is another one.
Okay.
We are the only ones that are not having a mayor in 2026, albeit we will have a combined authority, but we'll have a mayor in 2027. The other 4 areas across the country, they'll have a mayor from 2026 onwards.
What difference that makes?
Well, what it'll mean is you'll get more powers, you'll get more funding.
Once you have your own mayor?
Once you have a mayor. So in the first year, Cheshire and Warrington will only get half of its 21.4 million pounds. So it's still,
so it looks like that in 2027 there will be a mayoral election for Cheshire and Warrington together. Yeah. In Cheshire, so is that Cheshire East, Cheshire West?
Cheshire East Council, Cheshire West and Chester Council, and Warrington Council. And we work alongside what's called a business advisory board. Right. It's really important for your viewers to know that businesses are not sidelined in any of this. Okay. Businesses are a really important feature in devolution. It is about Cheshire and Warrington being the healthiest, most sustainable, most inclusive economy in the UK by 2040. That's where we want to be. Yeah. And the business community has got a massive role to play in making that happen. That's why we have a business advisory board. That's why the chair of that board sits will sit on the combined authority board. So the voice of business is front and centre on everything that happens.
Faisal, if I jump in there, because this is so important and it can't come soon enough. So if you look at Andy Burnham's doing a great job in Greater Manchester, as we know, he's a closet Warringtonian, grew up in Culcheth in Warrington, he's a Warrington Wolves fan as well as supporting Everton. So he has got a soft spot for our town. However, it's his job to sell Greater Manchester. So a few months ago, he was in Dublin selling the city of Manchester as a location, a destination for tech firms for their headquarters, and quite rightly so. He's also working with his good friend Steve Rotherham over in the Liverpool City region to organise a trade visit to India. And we want to be part of that, because at the moment, Cheshire and Warrington doesn't have that figurehead, it doesn't have that voice. So we know that we're missing out on some of these opportunities. And because we're not at that table, we don't know what the opportunities are necessarily. The big concern for us is the nuclear sector. So we've got most of the UK's nuclear companies are based at Birchwood Park. So we've got about 5,400 people employed in the nuclear sector, and Birchwood Park is owned by Warrington Borough Council. We need to sustain that and indeed grow to it, because that's where a lot of the economic value comes for the Warrington economy. So unless somebody's fighting that fight for us, like a mayor, there's always a risk that we start to lose some of those jobs. So from a business perspective, this can't come soon enough, because it's gone on for too many years where we've thought about it, we've had discussions. Now it's finally happened. We're looking forward to it.
Excellent. I think you put it very, very nicely. And giving an example of Greater Manchester and Liverpool, how they are actually taking their cities forward is absolutely brilliant. And you need somebody who can actually lead at front and make things happen. And this is why Cheshire and Warrington Devolution Deal is really, really
massively important. If you think about what Keir Starmer did on his second day in office in Number 10, he brought in all the regional mayors. So Steve Rotherham was there, Andy Burnham was there, Tracy Brown was there.
Having our own mayor.
Cheshire and Warrington weren't there. Because we don't have a mayor. So we lose out every time. So the funding that's available to Liverpool and its area, the funding that's available to Manchester in the area, goes towards supporting inward investment, right? Cheshire and Warrington don't have that. So as every day goes by, it's harder for Cheshire and Warrington to attract investments on the same level playing field as Liverpool and Manchester. In 12 months' time, we'll be on the same level playing pitch.
Excellent. Really interesting, Steve. I mean, I'm sure the audience would be really pleased to hear what Stephen is saying today with devolution and lots of other important topics we are discussing. So before we take a last break, I just want to let you know you're really going to listen, really important topic now, which is house building and planning issues with the councils. Stay tuned. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's continue our talk with Steve and Stephen. Right, Steve, so what we need to discuss now is really hot topic, which is most of the developers, most of the residents who want to do a small extensions or want to build one house, two houses or 10 houses, they all come and say there is so much issue with the planning department and there are huge delays and it costs a lot. So when you say that you are helping businesses, of course there are a number of different sectors in the business and you help each of every them. But what about this house builders? How you're helping them? The issues they are getting right now is huge. I mean, we deal with lots of developers and commercial investments, people who does investments in commercial properties and residential properties. They all talk about is the delays with the councils or at the planning point of. So would you elaborate a little bit? What are
certainly.
The issues?
So when you submit a planning application, oftentimes it's not the council where the delays are taking place. There is a planning law to be followed,
sure.
And the planning consent must take 8 weeks. There is consultation to be taken, or it needs to be 12, 13 weeks for a larger scale developments. But there are so many variables at play. When you hear that there are delays with the planning system, it assumes that the application is correct in the first place, that all the component parts of that application are complete and accurate and to the standard that's necessary. And very often that's not the case. It's not a fault of the applicant oftentimes, but we offer what's called a pre-advisory service, which is a stage before planning application, pre-planning, which gives the opportunity for the applicant to understand exactly what is needed, all the different considerations, and to make sure that all the material is prepared to the right standard, so that when the application does commence, it'll get a much clearer run through the process. But the council has to consult with what's called statutory consultees. Now, sometimes that can be the Environment Agency, sometimes that can be Sport England, sometimes it can be the local police authority, Highways England. There's various. So the council is dependent on those agencies responding in time. And sometimes the delays in those agencies. But what you hear is that the planning application is delayed with the council, and it isn't always with the council. Yeah. Undoubtedly, there are insufficient staff numbers in a local authority to deal with the volume of planning. And we see this in Warrington because we are such a vibrant town, economically very buoyant, very strong. And what comes with that is a very active, high demand planning team. But there's not enough of them, frankly. And one of the reasons for that is that the council can't afford to have the numbers of staff involved in planning in order to get through the volume and at the pace that really even the planning department wants to get through. However, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that is currently going through Parliament is giving the opportunities for local authorities to set their planning fees locally. At the moment, the planning fees are set nationally. Okay. All right. So if there is a high demand, what you'll often find with investors, particularly house builders, they are prepared to pay more for dedicated resource because an investment committee will make a decision to invest, and they want some absolute surety that their investment, from the time it's made to the time that return appears, that there is some confidence in that time frame. Well, if they've got variables in between, like the planning, and they're unsure quite how that's going to go, simply because there's not enough staff in the local authority, any investor's prepared to pay to have almost like a bit of a private service. Now, it's not a private service. I wouldn't want you to think that it is, but they are prepared to pay for dedicated staff. When the Planning and Infrastructure Bill goes through, local authorities like Warrington will be able to charge at a rate that can invest more staff in the service so that the planning process takes place much quicker. But it's not always the case that the delays are down to the council. Right. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's because the council are waiting on responses from statutory consultees, or the application in the first place is not at the standard it needs to be.
If I can give an example of that recent one. So one of our companies based along the Ship Canal, ultimately Indian owned, very exciting project there. So 30 new jobs in recycling, but manufacturing. And Warrington Council had done its bit. Steve's team got involved, moved that along pretty quickly. However, it was down to the Environment Agency, and that's not giving unnecessary criticism of the Environment Agency. They're under pressure as well. Some of the reasons that Steve just alluded to, they're understaffed. Maybe if those staff went and worked in the private sector, they could earn more. So they are doing it for the right reasons. And we had a situation where we had the British consulate in Mumbai putting pressure on the Environment Agency to try and get them to speed up, because there was a danger that project was going to fall back and miss some of the deadlines that was going to trigger some funding from another part of UK government. So there were a lot of stakeholders involved in that. Where we came in was trying to move that forward and make sure everybody was talking to each other, and ultimately we did get that deal over the line, and I'd say 30 great jobs from an overseas employer coming to Warrington.
Right, okay. And when you say pre-application, so I mean, this is very common. Lots of house builders or anybody who wants a planning for extension, and they do put a pre-planning application. So any fee pays for that application goes to the council locally. Yes, it does. And that's why that process is quite speed up process.
Yeah, and there's in Warrington we intentionally take quite a different approach to many other authorities. So if a planning application is inaccurate in any way, or if there's anything missing, in a lot of other authorities, and I'd say the majority of them, it's just rejected. Yeah. And you've got to go back to the beginning and start again. I go back to that investor experience in Warrington, whether you're building an extension or whether you're building a logistics park, it's the same thing. If we feel that the planning application has got parts of it missing, or it's not quite the right standard, rather than telling the applicant to just go back to the beginning, we completely reject the application outright, we'll sit down with the applicant and we'll work with them on what needs to be done to make the application correct in terms of standard or content and so on. And so that can take time.
Yeah.
Whereas it would be much easier, actually, for the planning
To just
department to
reject
say, there's a rejection, we move straight on to the next one. And that'll frustrate the investor community. So we might be getting through the applications quick, but the actual experience is not very good. And so in Warrington, we do try and have that kind of partnership approach where we can.
What happens if there is a planning application came to you guys and you reject the planning application on whatever grounds, and it happens. I've seen it,
Yeah.
and then the applicant goes to the inspector, appeal, and that appeal gets successful.
Mhm.
So how do you look at that particular application where things gone wrong, and how did you not manage to actually get that application successful at the first place? And do you have some kind of mechanism where you do like a feedback or learn from those kind of applications?
Yeah, and it's not often the case that the local authority got it wrong. I think sometimes, and this happens quite a lot, we'll have a planning application, it will be rejected. Before it even gets to a planning committee, it's rejected.
Yeah.
The applicant will take that application to appeal.
Yeah.
But in between times, new material is introduced.
Right.
And that new material is then taken into account when the appeal's heard. If that new material had been available at the time of the decision, the chances are they would have got the planning consent.
So would it not be better than
That's not always the case, but
Yeah.
it can be the case at that.
but that means that if you reject the planning application on whatever grounds, and then you've got those points that
Yeah.
on what basis it's been rejected, and if the applicant goes back and then rectify those rejection points and then give that further evidence to you, I mean,
Yeah.
should it not actually apply to you back again rather
Well,
than going to?
well, what
I
we
mean, they
would-
will only go to appeal at the last resort, wouldn't it? Because it got very costly process.
It's very expensive and it's time consuming as well, because there is a backlog of appeals as well. What we will always do is, before we make the decision, it's what's called determination.
Right.
So before we determine a planning application, we will always go back to the applicant and say, look, we are unable to grant you consent here because you've not addressed this, or this, or whatever it happens to be, right? And if the applicant turns around and says, well, I'm afraid that's the way it's got to be, and we'll say, well, if that's the case, we're going to have to determine the application, and unfortunately, we're going to have to reject it. What then happens is the applicant takes the decision to appeal, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the applicant then introduces new material that could have been introduced before that determination was made. And that would have saved the applicant a lot of money because they're not having to employ solicitors to have their appeal heard in front of a planning inspector. But sometimes it is the case that the planning inspector simply takes a different view. It doesn't necessarily mean that the council's wrong, because on a very similar case with a very different planning inspector, there'll be a different finding. So sometimes it just comes down to really sometimes quite narrow points in law.
Steve, it's a very factual kind of information, really, isn't it? It's not very vague as compared to, for example, if you take a case to a judge and that judgment comes out, and then same case you take it to another judge, and sometimes that judgment comes totally different. It depends on the judgment. But planning is not that kind of thing, is there?
Planning determination is based on planning law and planning policy.
Exactly.
All right. But within policy and within law, there is always room for interpretation. And you see that even with planning inspectors. I agree with you completely. It's not quite as open as what you might find with a high court judge or a district judge or anything like that. The arguments are much narrower, but that's not to say that there are not room for interpretation, that one planning inspector might find one way, another planning inspector might find another. And you see that most clearly when it comes to determination of local plans. So these are the suite of planning policies that underpin planning applications with any given local authority. And that's where you really do see planning inspectors taking very different views on the necessity for employment land or housing land or what the infrastructure needs might be. So it isn't an exact science in that respect.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I know I'm concerned about the time. The last thing I think I would like to talk about, the Warrington housing.
Yeah.
How are you doing in terms of social housing and providing the houses to the general public? I can see houses are being built all over Warrington right now.
Yeah.
Are you meeting the demand, or what is the demand? You have the numbers?
Yeah, so you have what's called a 5-year housing land supply. So that is land that is capable of delivering homes. Now, whether homes are delivered or not really is a function of oftentimes the local housing associations, registered providers, or house builders, the traditional house builders. So in Warrington, we need to make sure that the land is available. And at the moment, we are meeting our 5-year land supply. We've got to be delivering homes at the rate of 865 per year for the next 2.5 years before our next local plan is up for review. Then we know our target's going to go up. You'll have heard that the government want to deliver 1.5 million homes in their parliament, and that's a real stretch for them. But locally, 865 homes per year, and that's 2, 3, 4, 5 bed boxes, but sometimes that's kind of apartment living in the town centre. But going back to your point on the social housing, that is a really interesting topic, and we're very happy to come back and talk about that at a future time. But 20% of houses that are built in Warrington have to be affordable. But affordable is only 80% of the market rate. Well, if the market rate is very high, 80% of something that's very high still isn't very affordable. But that's the definition in planning law. Right. Social housing is something completely different. Social housing requires government funding to be funneled through either local authorities or the registered providers. And that's what we've really struggled to deliver in Warrington. We are not delivering, and this isn't a Warrington phenomenon, by the way. There is an insufficient amount of social housing across the entire country. And government after government have wrestled with this. And I think that the Labour government at the moment have realised that the best organisations to deliver social housing are councils themselves, through devolution, through partnerships with Homes England. And that's kind of where we're positioning ourselves.
So would you be able to actually invest in social housing if there is a devolution and that funding comes to you?
Absolutely, because what that devolution brings is guaranteed partnership status with Homes England. Okay. So social housing is not viable from an investor point of view.
Yeah, of course,
it requires public sector intervention to make it viable. So that kind of tripartite relationship between a housing developer, the local authority, and Homes England, through the vehicle of devolution, is how you're going to ultimately deliver social housing. And we've got to do that at scale.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stephen. Really, really pleased to have you in my show, and it was very informative. Viewers, I hope you enjoyed the program today. We had Steve and Stephen from Warrington Borough Council and Warrington Chamber. We talked about a number of different issues, and I hope that has given you a little bit of information about how local authorities work, their role in local economic growth, jobs, businesses, and how do they work. Even we talked about planning, housing, devolution. A lot of topics to cover in 60 minutes. Thank you for listening. I will see you next time. Goodbye.